Life as a medieval farmer was nothing like people think. It wasn't peaceful, it wasn't simple, it was something else entirely. Before you say you could handle it, take a closer look, because once you see what it really involves, you might not be so sure anymore. Waking up every day on land that doesn't belong to you. Not today, not ever. For medieval farmers, that wasn't just a bad deal. It was the way things worked. About 90% of them were tenants, stuck working someone else's soil until their bodies gave out. And in return, they are paid with sweat, crops, and years they never got back. Getting your hands on your own piece of land? Good luck with that. Most farmers were stuck in a cycle that kept them working other people's soil for generations. The local lord owned everything, and he wasn't interested in selling. When researchers studied medieval land records from England, they found that less than 5% of farmers ever managed to buy their own land. Talk about a rigged system. Even the land they did farm was often terrible. If medieval soil could talk, it would probably just groan in pain. The best fields were usually kept for the Lord's personal use, while farmers got stuck with rocky patches full of stones that would break their wooden plows, steep hillsides where everything washed away in the rain, or overused fields where nothing wanted to grow anymore. The way land was divided made everything worse. Instead of having one nice field, a farmer might have 15 tiny strips scattered all over the place. One day's work could mean walking miles between different plots. Medieval farmers got their daily steps in way before fitness trackers were a thing. Then there was the common land used for grazing animals or collecting firewood. This shared resource could be taken away at any moment if the Lord decided he wanted to use it differently. Thousands of peasants lost access to grazing land during the enclosure movement, when lords fenced off common areas for their own profit. Housing wasn't any better than the land situation. Most medieval farmers lived in homes made from wooden frames filled with wattle or woven sticks and daub, which is a mixture of mud, clay, and animal dung. The roof was usually thatch, bundles of straw or reeds tied together. During heavy rains, these roofs leaked like crazy, turning homes into muddy puddles. Inside these homes, the floor was just packed dirt. No tiles, no wood, just the ground beneath your feet. When it rained for days, that floor turned into a soggy mess. The original open-concept floor plan wasn't a design choice. It was just one room where everyone and everything had to fit. Most houses had no chimney either. The fire for cooking and heating sat right in the middle of the room, with smoke supposed to find its way out through a hole in the roof. Instead, it often filled the house, causing burning eyes and breathing problems. One study of medieval skeletons found that many had black deposits in their lungs from a lifetime of indoor smoke. Rats, mice, and insects weren't just occasional visitors. They were permanent roommates. With food stored inside and animals often brought in during winter, pests were impossible to avoid. Fleas were so common that they weren't even considered a problem worth mentioning in medieval records. When something broke in your house, there was no calling a repair service. Everything had to be fixed by the family, often with whatever materials they could find or afford. And speaking of affording things, that brings us to the next brutal reality of medieval farming life. What did medieval farmers eat? Nothing that would earn a star from any food critic, that's for sure. The daily menu featured the medieval version of fast food, a hunk of coarse bread that was so rough it could wear down your teeth, a bowl of watery vegetable stew called pottage, and some weak ale. This wasn't just an occasional sad meal. This was breakfast, lunch, and dinner almost every single day of your life. The bread itself deserves special mention. Made from rye or barley instead of wheat, it was dark, dense, and often full of tiny bits of millstone that chipped off during grinding. These medieval loaves were so hard that archaeologists have found skeletons with teeth worn down to nubs by age 30. When your bread is basically a rock with some flour in it, eating becomes an extreme sport. Meat? That was a luxury most farmers could only dream about. Records from medieval manors show that the average peasant family might eat meat only 5 times a year, usually during major festivals or if one of their animals got too sick to work. Chicken was the most common, not because it was preferred, but because it was the cheapest option when a lord demanded a feast. Winter brought what medieval people called the hunger months, January through April, when stored food ran low, but nothing new had grown yet. During these brutal times, between 20 and 30% of children in some villages didn't survive to see spring. The rest of the population would lose weight, strength, and resistance to disease. Food storage was another nightmare. Without refrigeration, salt was the main preservative, but it was expensive and heavily taxed. Most farmers couldn't afford enough salt to properly preserve meat for winter. Instead, they hung vegetables from ceiling beams, hoping they would dry before rotting. Grain was stored in large ceramic jars or wooden bins, but rats and insects claimed a significant portion before humans could eat it. Crop failures hit like a modern-day economic collapse, except deadlier. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 killed off 10% of the population across all of Northern Europe after heavy rains destroyed crops for 2 consecutive years. Medieval farmers didn't have emergency food delivery. Their DoorDash was whatever they could find growing in the woods. Desperate times called for desperate measures. When the regular food ran out, medieval farmers turned to famine foods, bitter herbs, tree bark, even boiled leather. One medieval document lists recipes for cooking rats during food shortages. The author helpfully notes that young rats taste better than old ones. Thanks for the tip. Malnutrition was so common that it left marks on skeletons that archaeologists can still identify today. Children's bones show growth lines that stopped and started multiple times as their bodies paused development during food shortages. Adults suffered from diseases like scurvy, from vitamin deficiencies, and osteomalacia. Soft bones caused by lack of calcium and vitamin D. The average medieval farmer stood several inches shorter than people today, partly because of poor childhood nutrition. Men averaged about 5 feet 4 inches tall, while women were closer to 5 feet even. When someone says they want to eat like their ancestors, they probably aren't picturing the medieval diet plan that made everyone fun-sized. While food was a constant struggle, medieval farmers still had another challenge to face. The tools medieval farmers used were about as advanced as a rock tied to a stick, which, frankly, wasn't far from reality. Their primary implement, the plow, was mostly wooden with just a small metal tip called a plowshare. These wooden plows broke constantly when hitting rocks or hard soil. Repairing or replacing a broken plow could cost up to 2 weeks' worth of a farmer's earnings. How inefficient were these plows? A farmer with a medieval wooden plow could work about 1 acre per day under good conditions. These medieval farmers weren't exactly winning any productivity awards. Sickles and scythes, the tools used for harvesting, were hardly better. Made from iron that rusted quickly, these tools needed constant maintenance. Farmers would spend hours sharpening them using rough stones, only to have them dull again after a few hours of work. Tool ownership itself was a luxury many couldn't afford. Historical records from English villages show that in some communities, up to 7 families would share a single plow. This meant waiting your turn while the planting season ticked away. It was like waiting for the bathroom in a house with 7 roommates, except your life depended on getting in. Iron tools represented a serious investment. A complete set of farming tools could cost the equivalent of 6 months' income for an average farmer. Many would inherit tools from their parents, using the same worn-out equipment for generations. The physical strain of using these tools was enormous. Without proper handles or ergonomic design, every swing of a scythe or push of a plow sent shockwaves through a farmer's body. Most farmers developed severe arthritis by their 30s, with distinctive wear patterns in their shoulder and back joints from repetitive tool use. Hauling water was another daily burden that required special tools. Without indoor plumbing, every drop used for cooking, cleaning, or drinking had to be carried from wells or streams. A typical family needed about 20 gallons daily, weighing more than 160 pounds total. Storage containers were equally primitive. Grain had to be kept in pottery jars or wooden barrels that often leaked or allowed dampness in. Tools for processing harvested crops were limited to basic flails that required hours of manual threshing to separate grain from chaff. It was like trying to separate hundreds of M&Ms from their shells by hitting them with a stick. Tedious and endlessly frustrating. Injuries from tools were commonplace and often serious. Without proper medical care, a cut from a rusty sickle could lead to infection and death. Perhaps most frustrating was the complete lack of mechanical advantage. No engines, no gears, no hydraulics, just human and animal muscle power straining against crude implements. Every bushel of grain, every load of hay, every stone for building had to be moved by hand. While these primitive tools made physical work a constant struggle, they weren't even the worst part of a medieval farmer's life. The real tragedy was something far more fundamental. Freedom? Medieval farmers didn't even know the meaning of the word. Most were bound by custom or birth to the land they lived on and couldn't legally leave without permission. This system, called serfdom, affected about 60% of the medieval European population at its peak. You didn't choose to be a serf, you were born into it, like inheriting a prison sentence that never ends. Serfs had no right to move, marry, or work elsewhere unless granted approval by the local lord. Want to move to the next village over? Get ready to pay a hefty fine. Want to marry someone from another manor? That would cost you too. Historical records show that serfs paid a tax called merchet just for permission to marry, which could cost as much as a whole year's earnings. Medieval dating was expensive before you even bought dinner. Children were expected to follow their parents' role. Farming wasn't a choice, it was a duty. From as young as 6 or 7 years old, kids worked alongside adults in the fields. By age 12, they were expected to handle full adult work. Education? Not a chance. Fewer than 5% of peasants could read or write. The idea of a medieval farmer becoming a merchant or craftsman was about as likely as them flying to the moon. Travel was extremely limited. Many never left their village or saw a nearby town. Studies of medieval manners found that the average peasant lived and died within a 10-mile radius of where they were born. Their entire world was smaller than some modern college campuses. The medieval version of an exciting road trip was walking to the next village for their annual fair, if they got permission. Disobeying the local authority could lead to punishment, labor penalties, or public shaming. Court records from medieval villages show people being forced to stand in the town square holding heavy stones for hours as punishment for minor offenses like talking back to the local bailiff. More serious offenses could lead to time in the stocks, flogging, or even worse. Farmers had no say in village decisions. Councils and courts were controlled by landowners or clergy. The Lord Steward made rules about when to plant, when to harvest, and how much of your crop you had to hand over as payment. If you thought the rules were unfair, too bad. Speaking out against unfair treatment could result in losing your home or being branded a troublemaker. Education was rare. Most farmers couldn't read or write, leaving them dependent on others for legal or religious matters. This meant that any time a farmer needed to understand a contract or document, they had to trust someone else to explain it truthfully. Manor records show countless cases of peasants being cheated because they couldn't read the terms of agreements they were forced to accept. Taxes and rules could change suddenly, and farmers had no power to protest or refuse. One year, the tax might be a third of your grain crop. The next year, the lord could decide he needed more and take half. Records show some lords demanded special taxes for everything from repairing castle walls to paying ransoms when the lord's son was captured in battle. Medieval tax season was like modern tax season, except instead of software, you had a guy with a sword collecting payment. Life paths were fixed from birth. Breaking away from farming was nearly impossible for the poor. If you were born to farmers, you'd die a farmer. And if you tried to escape your village without permission, you could be hunted down, returned, and severely punished. Some manors even had professional slave catchers whose job was to bring back runaway serfs. The harsh reality was that medieval farmers lived in a system designed to keep them exactly where they were, poor, uneducated, and working for someone else's benefit. While their tools could break and be replaced, their status in society was permanently fixed. But all these human-made problems paled in comparison to what happened when the skies darkened. Farmers today might complain about a little rain ruining their weekend plans. Medieval farmers watched the skies with genuine fear because the wrong weather at the wrong time could mean death for their entire family. Weather wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a constant threat that could destroy everything they worked for in a matter of hours. Droughts were particularly devastating. Without modern irrigation systems, medieval farmers were completely dependent on rainfall. One dry summer could reduce crop yields by up to 70%. Medieval farmers would have traded their best cow for a single modern garden hose. Their idea of a water park was just a puddle that hadn't dried up yet. On the flip side, too much rain was equally destructive. Medieval drainage systems consisted of simple ditches dug by hand, completely inadequate for handling severe storms. When heavy rains came, fields turned into lakes within hours. The wet summer of 1315 was so devastating that it triggered a famine lasting 2 years and killed an estimated 10% of Europe's population. Early frosts presented another deadly threat. A single cold night in early autumn could kill crops before harvest. Medieval farmers had no reliable weather forecasts, just folk wisdom passed down through generations. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight might sound quaint, but it wasn't much help against unexpected temperature drops. Strong storms could flatten fields in minutes. Without modern weather warnings, medieval farmers had no time to prepare or protect their crops. Mother Nature basically played whack-a-mole with medieval farms, and the farmers were definitely the moles. The effects of bad weather extended beyond the fields. Many medieval homes had thatched roofs that leaked during heavy rains. During winter storms, snow could pile up on these roofs, sometimes causing them to collapse entirely. Manor records from northern England describe entire families killed when their roofs caved in during blizzards. Long winters were especially brutal. Without effective heating systems, temperatures inside peasant homes could drop below freezing. Medieval winter fashion wasn't about style. It was about seeing how many layers you could wear and still move your arms to chop firewood. Livestock suffered terribly in extreme weather, too. Most animals were kept in barns with minimal protection from the elements. Cold winters could kill entire herds of sheep or cattle. For farmers who relied on animals for both food and labor, these losses were catastrophic. Even insects and rodents seemed to conspire with the weather against medieval farmers. Wet years brought more rats and mice that could devastate grain stores. The chronicles of St. Albans Abbey mention years when mice ate what little the rain had spared, leaving whole villages on the brink of starvation. While natural disasters tested their resilience, there was another challenge medieval farmers faced daily. The physical toll of being a medieval farmer started early and ended late, usually with an early death. From the moment children could walk, they were put to work. By age 6, kids were already gathering eggs, scaring birds from fields, and helping with simple tasks. Their bodies were machines that rarely stopped moving, bent over fields from dawn until dusk, day after day, year after year. Working the land meant constant bending, lifting, and straining. Before your back could even fully develop, it was already being damaged. Studies of medieval skeletons show evidence of compressed vertebrae and arthritic joints in farmers as young as 25 years old. Their spines looked like they'd been used as the village roadway. Many bones show clear signs of herniated discs and degeneration that would make anyone wince. The repetitive motions of swinging tools like scythes and flails led to distinctive patterns of wear on shoulder joints. One study found that medieval farmers' skeletons could be identified just by looking at the specific damage to their right shoulders, worn down from a lifetime of the same swinging motion. Their bodies told the story of their brutal work long after death. Feet suffered terribly too. Shoes were made of rough leather or even woven straw, offering almost no protection or support. Most farmers worked barefoot in warmer months, leaving their feet vulnerable to cuts, splinters, and parasitic infections. You think stepping on small toys hurts? Try a medieval field full of sharp rocks, thorns, and the occasional rusty nail. Foot injuries could turn deadly when infection set in, with no medicine to stop it. Hygiene was a luxury few could afford. Clean water was precious and used mainly for drinking and cooking. Bathing was rare, sometimes happening only a few times a year. Clothes were seldom washed and often worn until they fell apart. Lice and fleas were so common that they appear in court records only when someone had an unusually severe problem. This lack of cleanliness led to constant skin problems. Rashes, boils, and fungal infections were just part of everyday life. Scabies, a mite that burrows under the skin causing intense itching, was so common that it had dozens of local names across Europe. There was no relief from the misery except homemade remedies that often made things worse. The real killers were waterborne diseases. Wells and streams were often contaminated by animal waste or human sewage. Dysentery and typhoid swept through villages regularly, killing the very young and very old first. One medieval medical text advised farmers to check if water was safe by looking at the color, advice that did little to protect them from invisible threats. Parasites were unwelcome visitors in nearly every farmer's body. Intestinal worms affected over 80% of the medieval population, according to studies of preserved waste. These parasites stole precious nutrients from already malnourished bodies, causing weakness, anemia, and stunted growth. The average medieval farmer was hosting more unwanted guests than a cheap motel with free breakfast. Medical care was primitive at best, non-existent at worst. Most rural areas had no access to trained healers. Instead, they relied on local people using herbs, prayers, and folk wisdom. Got a broken bone? Here's a splint and some willow bark tea for the pain. Infected wound? Let's try some moldy bread on it, which sometimes actually worked since some molds contain natural antibiotics. Still, for most serious injuries or illnesses, you were left to hope your body could heal itself. Women faced additional health risks from childbirth. Without proper medical care, giving birth was extraordinarily dangerous. Historical records suggest that up to 20% of women died during childbirth or from related complications. Those who survived often suffered from permanent injuries that never properly healed. Life expectancy for a medieval farmer was around 30 to 40 years. But that doesn't tell the whole story. If you survived childhood, and many didn't, you might make it to 50. But those final years would be lived in a body broken down by decades of hard labor, poor nutrition, and untreated injuries. All this suffering, all this effort, all this pain, and for what? For a life defined by struggle with little chance of improvement. For a world where a single bad harvest could undo years of work. For a society that viewed farmers as little more than tools to work the land. Now, do you think you could do it?